Yes.
Come on up.
Hey, Brent. Good to see you.
All right. You got here just in time because Jim was about to take your place.
Oh, goodness.
I can never take your place.
Representative Frank Guinta represents New Hampshire's 1st District in the United States Congress, where he serves on the House Budget Committee, as well as the Financial Services Committee, focused on cutting taxes and regulations. Last year, he founded the bipartisan task force to combat the heroin epidemic, which now includes over 80 Republican and Democrat members. His leadership was crucial to passage of the recent Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, strengthening prevention, treatment, and recovery programs. The bill includes his legislation to protect first responders who administer emergency treatment to overdose victims from liability. As Manchester's 2-term mayor, Representative Guinta cut taxes for the first time in a decade and balanced the city budget, helping Manchester become one of CNN's best places to live. In Congress, he has helped to provide new safety equipment to New Hampshire's brave firefighters. He lives in Manchester with his wife Morgan, daughter Colby, and son Jack. Representative Frank Guinta.
Thanks, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to chat a little bit about what was going on in Washington over the course of the year and what I anticipate as some of the chief issues that we're going to be dealing with at the end of the year and then as we start the next Congress. First, let me kind of get out of the way in terms of the direct issues that I think impact our fire departments across the state and across the nation. I serve, as Brent mentioned, on the Financial Services Committee, but also on the Budget Committee. I was added to the Budget Committee back in about April of this year. I served on it in my first term, and I'm back on this term. And why is that important? Because we, at the beginning of the process, have the ability to determine what are the priorities of the budget. And being on the committee allows me to try to work with our fellow committee members, both Republican and Democrat, to put forth issues that we hope will stay in the budget from the beginning to the end. And being a former mayor and understanding municipal government, which not every legislator has that same experience, I have the ability, the unique ability, to offer my comments about municipal-based needs, and particularly the grant process that you all go through for fire departments. And that's something that I support. It's something I will continue to support. And I think it's important for you to know that the earlier we get it included in the process, the higher the probability that the proper level of resources will be retained through the budget process as we go toward the end of the year when we finalize the budget. If for some reason there is a change during the budget process, we always have the appropriations bills that we can file amendments, which I have done in the past and will continue to do, and try to work bipartisanly on that. There's a gentleman, Bill Pascrell, who is a Democrat on the committee who was also a mayor, and we work together to try to find sort of that common ground from a municipal perspective on what the budgetary needs are at the federal level. And as I said, not every legislator brings that same level of experience or appreciation, because they might have a different background or a different perspective. So that's something I think is important for New Hampshire, considering we're a small state. We've got to make sure that we work as a delegation to bring the proper resources back to the state of New Hampshire. We're up against states like New York and Florida, California, Texas, with huge delegations. Huge delegations. And that does have an impact, believe it or not, on the process of restoring dollars to the individual states. Most people, I think, don't appreciate that for every dollar New Hampshire sends to Washington, we only get about a 72-cent return. To me, that's not a fair or just figure, so we try to find ways to equalize those figures, and one of the best ways we can do it is through the beginning of the budget process. At the end of the year, when we return after the election, we'll deal with a budget extension and then tax extenders, and then we'll start, depending on what happens with the election, that'll sort of dictate and determine what the policies are going to be from the President of the United States, and then how we move forward legislatively through the House and the Senate. What I think will continue to be an issue for the Congress and certainly an issue for me is the heroin and opioid crisis. You know, this is something that obviously has impacted our state rather tremendously. We had 47th per capita in deaths about a year and a half ago. A year later, we're at 3rd per capita in deaths, unfortunately, 439 people last year that died, and we're on track, unfortunately, to exceed that number this year. So this is something that has been, I think, personal to many of us, and including you, because a lot of your departments are probably first on the scene in many circumstances when there's a call for service. We did pass the CARA legislation, the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. That, as you probably followed, was a bill that passed in the Senate, came over to the House. We sort of unwrapped it into 18 different pieces of legislation. They went through 4 committees of jurisdiction. And each of those bills passed bipartisanly. Our task force, the task force that I'm chairman of, made recommendations on modifications of each and every bill, and we were able to make sure that treatment and recovery money, one of the most important components of that bill, remained in the bill. And then we got it to the president, he signed it into law, and we started funding it in September. So we're hoping that this money will get to, through state government, into the hands of our first responders. It's $192 million a year for each of the next 5 years, but it's the first of what I think are many steps that we're going to be taking to try to combat this issue. Smaller communities sometimes have a more challenging impact than larger communities, just based on the size and scope of your ability to respond, whether it's fire department, police department, or EMTs. If you don't have that, if you're a small community, you don't have the same access as a Manchester or Portsmouth or a Rochester or a Laconia, it might be more challenging. So in that circumstance, if you're having issues, please let me know so we can try through the grant process to get you the resources that you require to help those individuals who are being impacted. In addition to that, I think, again, depends on who the next president of the United States is, but for me personally, as a former mayor and somebody who's in business, it's important to me to balance the budget to deal with the deficit and debt that we have. I certainly don't want to leave debt and deficits to our children. I'm a dad. Our kids are 13 and 11, and I struggle with that. I think about what our kids and grandkids' futures hold. We have a $19 trillion debt. It doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people because it's hard to quantify. But if you were born today, it's the equivalent of giving that family or that individual a $60,000 bill. That's what that individual owes. So when you put it in that context, the median income in Manchester is less than that. It's about $54,000, to give you a perspective. Families are still struggling. I want to be able to see an economy that's growing and thriving, and I think for that we need to have tax reform. I think we need to deal with healthcare reform. One thing that I really focused a lot of time and energy on that probably impacted a lot of our municipalities and unions in the state was the Cadillac tax that was included in the Affordable Care Act. A year and a half ago when I wrote the legislation to repeal the Cadillac tax, most people told me you're not going to get the President of the United States to agree that this was bad public policy. But this was an example of where Republicans and Democrats, business and unions worked together to try to find a path to convince the administration that this was not in the best interest of families, it was not in the best interest of unions, it was not in the best interest of taxpayers, and it was not in the best interest of the private sector and retirees. And we were able to get not a full repeal, but a 2-year delay. And I'm hoping that helped departments deal with the negotiations that you have with the communities that you serve. Certainly in Manchester, if we did not delay this, it would have been a $5 million impact, which is about a 2.5% hike on the tax rate. What that means is that residents would have had to pay for that additional cost. And I think as a former mayor, I think what mayors and aldermen and city councilors and town administrators look at, if they had to deal with that, is what are they going to cut in other areas to make ends meet. And that's not, we don't want to be cutting first responder services. We want to make sure that we're prepared in our communities now more than ever, given the challenges that we're having. So that was an example of where we were able to collaborate, and I'm very proud of that. that Republicans and Democrats were able to work together on things at that level and get things accomplished. So I want to continue that spirit of cooperation, regardless of who the next president is. I've said that I'll work with whoever that individual is to try to advocate for our state and the issues that I think are important to our nation. But to that end, if there's something that I can particularly do for you or for the department, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I, as I travel throughout the district, in my capacity as your representative, I'm happy to stop in and meet with you and visit the members of your communities. I want to make sure that people know that I'm accessible and that whatever the issue, whether it's related specifically to the fire service or if it's something else, that we're here to serve our constituents. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Floor is open.
Yes.
Well, I can start. My name is Richard Ryan from Goffstown Fire, right next door to Manchester. Fire chief over there, and I'm not unlike many fire chiefs that we represent or retired fire chiefs. And we've had firefighters that are coming down with cancer. And I've got one just completing treatment this week. And I know we've lost some good firefighters and fire chiefs from cancer. And what's your opinion or thoughts on a national presumptive firefighter cancer legislation to go national?
To cover, should somebody, because of a job-related death, I think it's something we should explore, absolutely. Look, I was in the insurance business before I was in elected office. And one of the things that's important to me, if there's an obligation that somebody has, that they should honor. So if there is a work-related, not just injury or death, there needs to be a fund to ensure that family is properly taken care of. I know firsthand that the carrier, the workers' comp insurance that you have for an individual may not account for the true needs of that particular family over the course of a lifetime of a firefighter. And personally, depending on what the income of that firefighter is, chances are workers' compensation settlement is going to only be a percentage of that, and that chances are it gets turned into an annuity, and it's probably 40 to 60% at best of what the true needs are for that family. So much like we're starting to have this discussion about what at the federal level should be done for those who serve on the front line, whether it's in our military or whether it's our first responders, given the nature of the needs that we have now for first responders. There is now a discussion, and Peter King from New York is actually leading this discussion because of what happened in New York on 9/11, to try to provide opportunities for us to do this at the federal level. So I'd be happy to, I honestly don't know if there's pending legislation. I can actually look into where it stands, and then I can personally get back to you. And I can get back to Brent so you can communicate to the group, so everyone has greater specificity.
Any other questions?
Yes. Tom Lambert, currently working in Rye. My question is more on a global level. In New Hampshire, every 2 years, and then more exaggerated every 4 years, we're bombarded with the elections and the information we're getting. And I have been talking to many people this year who aren't sick of the way it's being conducted and the influx of truths and half-truths and PAC funds and all that stuff. Is there anything with election reform that's being addressed or looked at?
The short answer is not really. Look, the First Amendment, the Supreme Court has ruled on this issue where they identify it as a First Amendment issue. So as long as a TV ad says at the bottom who it's paid for by, that meets the legal requirement under the law. Now, it can be Citizens for a Fantastic Ride. You don't know who that particularly is, but you could start that PAC tomorrow and put up an ad that is positive or negative about anybody you want, and under the law that's permissible. What I think most people in New Hampshire get frustrated with is because we are a targeted state, we're a small state, 4 electoral votes in the presidential, but it's a competitive state for both Republicans and Democrats, so we get a lot more attention than other states in the country, not to mention we're first in the nation primary, which is something that we want to keep. But the ads, I mean, I watch them when I'm home, and I kind of take a quick look at the ads. And I'm a bit shocked myself at some of the ads that I see. I'm running one ad right now. It's a positive ad, and it's about heroin and opioid use and the work that I've done on that particular issue. But I have been, the victim of a lot of negative advertising over the years. Unfortunately, I think that's just the direction that national politics is going. And I don't think it encourages people to vote. I don't think it encourages people about public service. I think that it brings the worst out in people. And as a result, I think people are more cynical and more frustrated about politics. And that's not where America was even 20 years ago. I mean, I'm 46, I just turned 46. I grew up, I was born in 1970. And the first president that I engaged with when I was old enough was Ronald Reagan in that era. And there was something good and decent about public service. And I could say that about Republicans and Democrats. I was so excited to meet people who served in public office because there was something for me that was noble about the profession. And I think right now, I mean, don't quote me, but I think it's about $60 million has been spent just in the U.S. Senate race here in New Hampshire. $60 million. And I think the record 2 years ago in the Scott Brown-Jean Shaheen race was around 25 or 30 million. And we've more than doubled that already. And we still have 4 weeks to go. And every day there's a new ad, for or against both of the candidates. So people rightfully so say, well, how do I know what to believe? I think the value, at least of being in New Hampshire, is that we as citizens are engaged. And we know the people that represent us. And I'd like to think that people make good decisions based on the engagement that they have with their governors, their senators, and their House members. But my suspicion is that based on the First Amendment and the court cases that have gone through, that have been adjudicated, I don't think things are going to change. I think you're going to see just the ongoing sort of negative advertising. And, for me, I'm trying to do positive advertising. It's difficult if and when you're attacked because you feel like you need to respond. But so far, I'm running an ad that's positive, talks about my work on the heroin and opioid issue. Yes.
Congressman Guinta, thank you for your service to
Yeah.
begin with. And in your position on the Budget Committee, have there been any discussions in regards to the funding of ATF in the future? ATF has a very specialized group that helps us immensely in fighting the violent crime of arson. And their laboratory is second to none, as well as the training that they provide. In years past, during the budget process, there's been talks of dismantling them and so forth. We have an ATF agent that's assigned to my office to provide service throughout the state to the fire departments. He's a fire protection engineer, he's a certified fire investigator. And to see that lost, I think, would be a travesty to the fire service because they provide great service to us. Is that something that's been discussed?
So when we work on the budget, we literally, as a committee, meet almost every single day, going through line by line, agency by agency, how we want to fund. And we work with the Appropriations Committee and the Ways and Means Committee on policy initiatives. But we ultimately start with a top line number at the budget level. We have an idea of how we want that funded, but we talk to the Appropriations Committee because they are the actual appropriators who will make that final decision. But we will make recommendations as to where those dollars should go. When it comes to public service, I obviously take an extra special interest. There are members from around the country who will question certain federal line items, and that has over the years been one of them. So my response to that is what I would like to see in place through the reform of the budget process, which the Budget Act is from 1974, it hasn't really been reformed over the years. Over this past summer, we went through a whole host of hearings in anticipation of doing budget reform next year. One of the things I'd like to include is some metrics for some of the programs that we're funding. Now, I don't think that's a negative, I think that's a positive, because you can prove through certain metrics how valuable some programs are. And that is one of them. The other one that gets talked about a lot that doesn't really impact you, but it impacts police, is the asset forfeiture program. That's another one that has gone back and forth in whether it's necessary and reasonable. Personally, I think it is. I think it's invaluable. But, so I've talked to the chairman about, well, let's put some metrics in, because if there's someone on the committee that doesn't like or doesn't think it's a federal obligation, but the metric proves that it's invaluable, that is an asset to me and to those who want to advocate for its inclusion in the budget. But I will tell you, I don't think it's going to get cut. We did not cut it this time. It didn't really have a serious discussion about it being removed this current budget cycle, and I don't suspect that it'll happen again next year. So I think you're safe, but we'll add that to our list of things that we feel should be included in the budget from the beginning of the process. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for allowing me to come. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks, Brent.